everyone. I am Dr. Piyush Singh, Counselor, Embassy of India, Berne. I welcome all of you to this webinar on opportunities in the Indian blockchain sector today. Let me begin with quoting a text from Arthashastra, the pioneering treatise on statecraft, written 2000 years ago by Kautilya, the man who was the strategic mind behind the establishment of the Mauryan Empire in India. Kautilya writes, any contract shall be valid provided that all the details of the object of the contract, such as the appearance, distinguishing marks, quantity, and quality, are properly noted down. 2 millennia have passed since then. However, the need of the human society to be able to rightly verify an item still remains. The solutions are still being improvised and transformed. Blockchain is the new type of network infrastructure that creates trust in networks by introducing distributed verifiability, auditability, and consensus. Blockchain presents the potential for achieving the vision of Honorable Prime Minister of India of less government and more governance. The Government of India has undertaken a number of reforms for further increasing the ease of doing business in India and for further integrating a self reliant India with the world. This webinar is a step in this direction, focusing on blockchain. India and Switzerland are long standing dynamic partners. The MISSP program is being run by Embassy of India Berne for further strengthening the linkages between the Indian and Swiss business ecosystems. I'm happy to note that in the last 6 months, more than 50 Swiss companies have onboarded on this program. Today, our presenters will include the knowledge partner of MISSP, T&A Consulting, the legal and tax partner of MISSP, Rotterdam Partner, a guest of honor representing the Geneva Chamber of Commerce, and a guest speaker from NESCOM, specifically speaking on the blockchain sector. So, with those words, I thank you for being with us. And now I invite the first speaker of the day, Mr. Tarun Gupta, partner, T&A Consulting, to please make his presentation on an overview of the Indian economy amidst the COVID-19 crisis. Mr. Gupta, the screen is all yours. You can take over.
Thank you, Dr. Singh, and good afternoon, everyone. Dr. Singh, that was an excellent introduction, and you've set the very high bar for this presentation. You know, as we are all in midst of a crisis, once in a lifetime, and I know one wise man said that never let a good crisis go waste. This pandemic will result in new business models, new business partnerships. Can India be the preferred business partner for Switzerland? What are the opportunities in India? The challenges? What is changing in India? What has changed in India? The aim of my presentation over the next 12 to 15 minutes would be to give you a realistic picture of India and not the Bollywood version. And also, over the last 8-10 weeks, there has been a deluge of webinars. And I'm aware earlier, death by PowerPoint, now death by webinars. So it's a deadly combination. We'll try to keep it light and give a message in every slide. Let's begin. So how do you define India? 4 letters, 4 Ds: democracy, demography, diversity, and disparity. What do I mean by that? Democracy, we are the world's largest democracy. 900 million people eligible to vote. 600 million people casted their vote in our federal elections last year. And the results were out in a couple of hours. That shows you the system, how it can achieve scale. Well, democracy can be chaotic, seem disorderly, and sometimes the decision making can be delayed because of her consensus approach. Demography. In the current time, we are lucky that our demographics favor us in the way that only 7% of our population is above the age of 60. Our median age is 29. We have the largest population in the world in the working age group of 15 to 65. And we will provide for nearly 1/5 of the global workforce. We add up the population of Switzerland, 8 to 9 million people every month to our working population, And this will continue for the next 10 to 15 years. All good, but we need to create jobs. If you ask a policymaker in India today, what's your single biggest challenge? Formal quality job creation. The third D is diversity. You know, India is unity in diversity. That's our line. And it is, if you go, India is more diverse than even if you look at whole European continent, from northern to southern Europe, eastern to western Europe. Diversity in terms of food habits, diversity in terms of languages. There are 22 official languages. And disparity. This is also a reality. 1% of our population, top 1%, controls 60% of the wealth. Top 10% of the population controls 77% of our wealth. Even the development across various states, equivalent to cantons in Switzerland, is not very uniform. There is a difference of 10x amongst the most developed state and the least developed state. In other countries like China, Brazil, the difference is 4x. So again, a challenge for our policymakers to ensure that we have a more equitable development. And finally, if you see the slide on your right, we are the only country in the world which moved from agrarian to services. We are proud of our, for example, information technology sector, contributes nearly 8% of our GDP, nearly 1/3 of our exports, or even 40% of our exports. But hey, it employs only 1% of our working population. If we need to create those jobs, those 8 to 9 million people entering the job market every month, we need to get our manufacturing right. So these were the 4Ds. And what is our vision? Our vision is to be a 5 trillion economy. It took us 60 years to reach first trillion. It took us another 7.5 years to reach a second trillion. And now we aim to double our GDP in the next 5 years. Is it ambitious? Very ambitious. Realistic, yes, but what it requires is a real GDP growth rate of 8%. And for that, we need a virtuous cycle of savings, exports, and investments. How are we doing on investments? Last 70 years, we got $600 billion of foreign direct investment. 50% of that, that's $300 billion, came only in the last 5 years. And 90% of that is automatic route. What it means is it did not require any government approval. It gives you an idea how open Indian economy is. So if you're a foreign company and you are in a sector which most of the sectors allow 100% FDI, you do not need to share your intellectual property, all your trade secrets with your Indian partner, because Indian partner may not be mandatorily required. That's an important aspect. And India is also the third most attractive Greenfield FDI destination. And why is that? Well, the answer is on this slide. India has shown one of the most significant improvement in ease of doing business. As Dr. Singh mentioned, that is the underlying aim of the government, to be now in the top 50 ease of doing business. We have moved 79 positions in the last 5 years. We are ranked consistently amongst the top 10 improvers in ease of doing business. Everybody has heard of BRICS, but now there's a new term as companies compete to get some supply chain, as companies move to diversify the supply chain. The new term is MIVIT. Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand. And how is India positioned? If you look at our rankings, we are positioned favorably amongst all the ranks which you see. But one big advantage which we have is our domestic market. So that brings me to the end of my first section of the presentation. How do you define India? The 4Ds: democracy, demography, diversity and disparity. What's our vision? And ease of doing business. Second, what's the India opportunity? That can be described in 4 alphabets: CFIT, consumption, formalization, infrastructure, and digitization. Let's begin with the first one. India is a consumption-driven economy, maybe unlike some of our Southeast Asian or other neighbors, which are export-dependent. 60% of our GDP is consumption-oriented, domestic consumption. We are the 6th largest consumer market in the world and tipped to be the 3rd largest in the next 10 years, where our private domestic consumption is expected to increase by 4 times. However, it also leads to some companies overestimating the size of Indian middle class. Today, if you look at the pyramid, we have about 10 million households with household income of above $30,000, and about another 25 million households between household income between $15,000 to $30,000. Really, this is the real middle class, which is about 200 million people. It's not small, but it's not 1.3 billion people. And this is the one of the biggest draws for a foreign company, is to cater to the India domestic consumption. What is the next alphabet? Formalization. F. India has approximately 75 million enterprises, which is 22 times the number of enterprises as compared to the US, and US economy is 8 times our size. So what is different in India? In India, 85% of our manufacturing firms in the organized sector are less than 50 employees. And that has an impact. Number one, it has an impact on our productivity. What we have is a lot of our manufacturing firms, even after 10 years, they have less than 100 employees. So we've classified them as dwarfs. Reason being, it has impacted their ability to create formal more jobs and productivity. So instead of dwarfs, what we need are babies which grow up to adults. An average American firm, for example, after I think 40 years, employs 8 times the number of people in manufacturing. An average firm in Mexico employs twice the number of people. So that's a challenge which we have. Second, we need to improve our tax to GDP ratio, which is at about 17%, whereas for China, it's about 22%. South Africa, it's about 27%. And only 5% of our population pays income tax. So second reason for formalization is we need to improve our tax to GDP ratio. I mentioned about 75 million enterprises. Only 10 million have any kind of tax registration, and only 5 million have any kind of tax and social security registration. So that is why it's important. And third reason for formalization is that we need to have sanctity of contract. India is ranked low on enforcement of contract. But now we have the bankruptcy code, where first time in India's history companies were liquidated, which is bringing about a better credit discipline, better value for a contract. Next, we move on to I, is infrastructure. Quite often our foreign investors have always said there were delays in ports, on transit times, which led to loss of productivity. If we have to achieve our 5 trillion economy goal, we need to invest in our infrastructure, and we've been doing that. Currently, we spend about $150 billion annually, and we need to increase that run rate to $300 billion annually for the next 5 years. How have we been doing? I'll give you 3 examples. Look at our roads. We have about 6 million kilometers of roads. I won't say anything about our driving habits. That's for another day. But we have 140,000 kilometers of national highways. 30% of that have been built in the last 5 years. In the next 5 years, we plan to build another 60,000 kilometers. So effectively, ladies and gentlemen, in 10 years, we would have doubled the extent of our national highways. Railways, a similar story. 2/3 of our railway track system is overutilized. It runs on 100% capacity utilization. If you look at our electrification, we have about 68,000 kilometers of tracks. 30,000 kilometers has been electrified since last 70 years. In the next 5 years, we plan to electrify the entire railway network. You look at our power sector. We were a power deficient country 6 years ago, ranging from 14 to 18% of power deficit. Now we have repivoted to renewable energy, where we aim to achieve a target of 175 gigawatt. Our solar installed capacity has increased by 1,000 times in the last 10 years. All these examples give you an indicator of scale and execution. Moving on to D, the fourth alphabet is digitization. And this is very relevant. I know my other speakers today will go more deep into it. But this is relevant because in India, we always had a challenge. How do you identify genuineness of a person? Dr. Singh gave a very good example of trust. But I've also learned trust and verify. So what we created is a system of biometrics, where today we have over 1 billion people with their iris scan and 10 fingerprints. We have an India stack which is built on the principle of presence-less, paperless, cashless, and then consent. What it means is, once We are moving towards this holy trinity of jam: a billion people on biometrics, a billion mobile, and a billion mobile accounts, bank accounts. What we want to do is a couple of things. A, we have a lot of welfare schemes. Now, when we have the bank accounts opened, in the last 6 years, we have transferred over $100 billion of benefits directly to the beneficiary's account. It has resulted in a drop in corruption significantly. The second, even after 70 years, we had 50 million odd credit card holders, but we have suddenly moved, leapfrogged into unified payment interface. And we have done 1 billion transactions in January. In fact, Google wrote to Federal Reserve that this is the kind of infrastructure which should be built in America. The Bank of International Settlements says that this infrastructure is suited both for developing countries and developed countries. And why we've been able to do that is the growth of our mobile users. We have 600 million people accessing internet on their mobiles. And the amount of data used has increased by 44 times in the last 5 years. So India opportunity, CFID, consumption, formalization, infrastructure, and digitization. Now, if there's an opportunity, there's a small matter of taxation. Well, we are taking care of that. We have had a reduction in our taxation from about 35% odd to 25%. If you start your manufacturing, it's even lower at 17%. But also another point, our tax authorities were infamous for litigation. But now we want to offer predictability, and we have signed 300 advanced pricing agreements. Second, also on our indirect taxation, India was a complicated market. But now we have a unified goods and service tax, where since its opening, we have uploaded 9 trillion invoices. Every month, we generate 60 million e-way passes for our goods and service tax. And it has resulted in our aim to reduce our logistics cost from 14% to 10%. So that brings me to the end of my second section, where we spoke about India opportunity, CFID, and the rationalization of tax rates. Now I move on to the last part of my presentation are the reforms. 4 letters once again, 4 L's. We start with laws. We've disbanded 1,000 laws. We want to reduce the compliance burden. We want to reduce the human intervention. So a lot of information now is online, which does not require human intervention. And you can see that also in our savings of cost and time, for example, in documentary credit. Second is with regards to liquidity. This has been controversial in terms of the amount of our incentive package, stimulus package, but we have focused on providing liquidity to businesses. $40 billion for micro and small enterprises, reduction in our lending rate. The focus is to provide funding to those businesses in line with the economic activity. And the third L of the reforms is labor. We have a host of labor laws at the federal level, at the state level. But now we are moving towards putting 44 central labor laws into 4 labor codes. That's it. And we are taking the fourth and the final L of the reforms is land. Land acquisition in India, complicated, expensive, time consuming. Now states are taking initiative to have land banks online, buy land from the farmers, to have 30 days approval, if approval not given. In fact, if you see the next slide, we have 44 industrial clusters, and we have ready industrial space of 2 million square meters ready for possession in 8 to 10 weeks. And this brings me to the end of my presentation. My last section was on the reforms. This gives you an idea of all the various marquee names which are present, various industrial clusters, more importantly across sectors. And we would love to see more Swiss names. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I come to the end of my slide, and I summarize by saying, first section, we spoke about India, the 4 Ds, democracy, demography, diversity, disparity, the vision, as well as the ease of doing business. Second, we spoke about India opportunity, CFID, consumption, formalization, infrastructure, digitization, rationalization of tax rate. And finally, we spoke about the 4 L's of the reforms: laws, liquidity, labor, and land. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Singh.
Giving us a comprehensive overview of the Indian economy and the opportunities in India for the world and for Switzerland. and for bilateral collaboration. Now, I move on to the next section. Today, we have with us a guest of honor, Mr. Vincent Subilia, who is the Director General of the Geneva Chamber of Commerce, Industry and Services. The embassy has been in close coordination with the Geneva Chamber of Commerce, Industry and Services, and has organized a number of joint events. Our common aim has been to strengthen India-Switzerland relationship. It's a pleasure and honor to have you here, Mr. Subilia. I'll request you to make a brief intervention on blockchain sector Indo-Swiss perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Singh. It's a true honor and a real pleasure to be addressing a few words to this landmark audience on this sunny day, and I'd like to extend my gratitude to the Embassy of India and to Dr. Singh in particular for the very fruitful cooperation which we have been enjoying during the last years. And I'd like also to praise the very quality of the work delivered by the Embassy, and today's presentation, MISSP program, is only a testimonial of again the high quality standards of what is being achieved by the Indian Embassy in Switzerland. It is also a token of the very strength of the relationships between Switzerland and India. As you know, we are celebrating more than 70 years of close relationships. India being one of the largest trading partners of Switzerland, actually the fourth largest in Asia, with roughly 18 billions of investments from Switzerland towards India, with roughly 250 Swiss companies being present on the Indian market. So again, frankly, a margin of maneuver and some room for improvement, but still at this stage a very strong footprint and a privileged historic one of Switzerland within India. And this holds true also for Geneva, which is often considered as the capital of global governance, as an international stronghold here in Switzerland. Among our relationships, of course, we are witnessing some very promising dynamics. We're talking and have been talking for several years about a free trade agreement, which the Chamber has been strongly advocating, because we believe, again, for the very reasons that you've mentioned, and thank you again for summing up the 4 Ds that are a perfect illustration of the Indian market. We believe that, again, there is some potential and therefore margins of maneuver to be grasped for both our economies, and therefore some additional work to be done. India is also a key partner to Switzerland, and that will bring me to today's topic in terms of innovation. We all appreciate, and having been traveling to India myself, I'm looking forward, once we're out of the pandemic, to head back to India with a delegation of Geneva entrepreneurs to witness on site what has been achieved in terms of milestones and the landmark work that has been done in India in terms of innovation. India is always viewed as a powerhouse in that respect. Coming myself from the legal and the financial world, which is a perfect Swiss product, if you wish. I very vividly remember spending nights talking to IT specialists in India, but India having moved up the value chain, not from a manufacturing dimension, to really being one of the key pioneer in terms of innovation. That's where blockchain plays a decisive role, and the digital world, in light of the very unprecedented times that we are going through, where physical meetings such as the one we are holding now are now moving thanks to this change of paradigm towards a more digital space. Innovation is really the leverage that both India and Switzerland can activate. And I often tell our friends including from India, that for landlocked countries such as Switzerland, there are two pillars to our prosperity. The first one is the openness to the world. We're an export-driven economy. The second one is precisely innovation, because that allows us to leapfrog. And while we have no commodities, we manage them here in Switzerland, but no raw material. The only raw material that we have is potentially our gray cells, and therefore the ability for the people of Switzerland, through some very tough trainings, to really master innovation, technological innovation. It's worth remembering that Geneva, for instance, saw the very birth of the internet, which was conceived at the CERN, which is one of the numerous international organizations that we are hosting here in Switzerland. So again, blockchain, which is a bit of a buzzword nowadays, is, in my humble view, a game changer in terms of innovation. And Switzerland has been quite pioneering in that respect. The very blockchain, if you wish, concept very much echoes and resonates with what Switzerland has to offer, which is enshrined in our DNA, i.e. trust. Because at the end of the day, what we're talking about is the economy of trust. And this is what blockchain, which can be declined into numerous applications, has to offer to the corporate world, i.e. security. And this very much, again, illustrates the Swiss-made factor, which is a token of reliability. So by resorting to blockchain, you ensure that the contractual partnership is one marked by trust, safety, and security. And I think this is the key principle. So of course, Switzerland has been very much proactive in that respect. And I must, again, very humbly say that Geneva has always been willing to play a key role here, and that our ecosystem, which is made quite uniquely of a very strong set of SMEs, which are the backbone of the economy, a large chunk of multinational companies mixed with international organizations, such as the UN here in Geneva, the WTO, the ITC, and the ITU, offers quite a unique setting and a blending for blockchain to be neutrally thought and implemented here from Switzerland and Geneva. And this is what the annual blockchain Congress is all about, held here in Geneva at the very early beginning of the year. So we had it in 2019 and 2020, and we look forward to welcoming you back in 2021. Because Geneva here has a role to play as capital of digital governance. Because not only do we want to offer blockchain to be implemented in several respects. For instance, in Geneva, the trade register here is processed towards blockchain, which offers the level of security, again, safety and trust towards its users. But we want to protect blockchain to ensure that it is not being misused. And that's where, again, where Switzerland being viewed as a safe haven or a safe harbor in that respect can play a role. So Switzerland has been really a pioneer in this respect. Geneva has always been at the forefront, and at our modest level, the Geneva Chamber of Commerce has also been wanting to really embed this blockchain. And to give you an example of what we have achieved, our last General Assembly, and we have 2,500 corporate members. You can imagine whenever we're holding a General Assembly, it calls to quite a large crowd of people. This time, in light of the tragic circumstances that we're witnessing and the sanitary recommendations that we had to implement, we needed to hold our AGM digitally through some streaming, but we needed to secure the votes. And for that purpose, we based ourselves on a blockchain related system, and it proved not only to work very efficiently, but also to save us time and energy. So again, from our perspective here within the House of Economy and the Chamber of Commerce, quite a useful tool, which really delivered some concrete outcome. And again, this is a knowledge which we are willing to share with our Indian friends and the 75 million enterprises that you have in the largest democracy of the world. So again, the Geneva Chamber of Commerce is very thankful to the Indian Embassy, to the MISP program for allowing us to share this expertise, and stands at your disposal for any further cooperation. Thank you very much indeed for your attention. And over to you, Dr. Sin. I give you the screen.
Thank you. Kind words, and thank you for bringing in the word innovation, in the discussion, particularly so because you're so true that innovation is a priority concept in India-Switzerland relationship. It was not very far last in September when the Honorable President of India visited Switzerland, and one of the documents signed was letter of intent for establishment of scientific and innovation alliance between India and Switzerland. So thank you for your kind intervention, and the embassy will continue to have a very strong and engaging relationship with CCIG. Thank you for joining us today. Please remain with us. There are a few questions posed to you. I'll ask you at the end of the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
This, I move on to the next section of the presentation today, where we have a guest speaker joining us from NASSCOM, Mr. Swapnil Bhatnagar, who is Director Research Assessment, and he'll be making his presentation on the opportunities in the Indian blockchain sector. So, Mr. Bhatnagar, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Singh, and good afternoon, everyone. As Mr. Subalia also mentioned, blockchain has been a buzzword for quite some time. And in this presentation today, I'll try to just quickly walk you through how the blockchain buzzword is actually being implemented on the ground. What are some of the adoption use cases that we're seeing in India? Primarily, I'm going to be looking at four main areas. One is the global investments and adoption that we see in blockchain. Then a quick overview of what the Indian blockchain ecosystem looks like. And again, both Mr. Subalia and Dr. Singh mentioned, innovation, and that cannot happen without really talking about the startup ecosystem. And then I would also like to touch a little bit on the regulatory environment in India around blockchain. Of course, you're going to get a more detailed presentation around that later on, but just would like to just do a quick check. Now, we've been hearing about blockchain for a very long time, and there have been some investments that have been going on. But if you really look at it, 2018 was the main tipping point year for blockchain, where both the VC investment, the number of deals, as well as the ICOs, they really became very real and strong. In fact, in 2018, the investments actually went higher than what they had cumulatively till then. And this is from a global perspective. But what is interesting to note again is that since 2018, the investments have started being distributed across all key industries, and especially for the audience in this meeting, financial services and the banking sector has really invested quite a lot in blockchain as well, whether it's in terms of establishing exchanges of trading or in enhancing the transactions and payment services. These have been some of the big areas where blockchain investments have happened since 2018. Now, I won't go through all of these, but these are, blockchain use cases are emerging across all industries today. Lots of pilots, lots of proof of concept projects are undergoing right now, and quite a few of them have actually reached the production stage as well. But this is still a government, it's a global viewpoint. What I'll do now very quickly is actually move more towards the different industries where the blockchain investments have been happening and the revenues are coming in from. If you will see on the right side, banking, financial services, and manufacturing really have been at the forefront of adopting blockchain in terms of real revenue coming from there. Banking traditionally has been, an early adopter of new technologies. and they're doing the same actually in this space as well. But the other verticals are also increasing and looking at blockchain for very specific use cases, and we expect that the real production projects are really growing and will continue to grow very rapidly in the next 12 to 24 months. So that was a little bit of the global perspective. If we really come to the India-specific blockchain ecosystem, it's a very interesting story. We started off in really in October of 2014, where some of the initial crypto exchanges and people started hearing about Bitcoin and the trading around that. As we move forward, in around late 2015, 2016, actually some very interesting things have started happening in terms of blockchain in the BFSI, the banking, financial services and insurance domain. Large insurance players actually formed the insurance consortium in India in 2016. So this was a very important step going forward. One of the key banks in India, which is Yes Bank, also implemented a multi-nodal blockchain solution for vendor financing in 2017. And you have to keep in mind, these are some of the initial seeds that have really led to the kind of growth that we're seeing in blockchain in India. The next big evolution really was, the establishment of the bank chain consortium in 2017. Because that's really where some of the major banks got together, and I'll talk more about it a little later in the presentation. So till now, a lot of this was driven by private enterprise and the advantages that they saw in blockchain. But around late 2017 is when the government of India and the different state governments that we have started really looking at blockchain as a serious technology for improving governance and providing citizen services. And that's where you'll see that a lot of pilot and initial projects started happening with state governments. Also, there was a beginning of a push to get some kind of a national blockchain strategy in place. In fact, some of that work is really culminating in very interesting points that are emerging around this time, and I'll talk about them a little later. So the government really got involved towards the later part of 2017, and since then, really, the combination of both their role of the government as a creator of the ecosystem or the infrastructure for blockchain, as well as a consumer for blockchain, has really increased the blockchain adoption in India. And we continue on this path, and very interesting things are upcoming. If we look at the Indian blockchain ecosystem, I think it's a very vibrant ecosystem. Mr. Subalia also mentioned his experience of working with the different IT services companies. They're all extremely positive on the blockchain opportunity, and they have significant investments in setting up centers of excellences in actually training people on blockchain. So from a services perspective of setting up how to execute blockchain, there's a lot of very experienced personnel that are already in India. Add to that a very vibrant startup ecosystem. We see a lot of interesting things that are being done, both on the core technology part of it, but also, and more interestingly, on the applications of blockchain. So this is sort of the supply side. What we are also seeing is that the public sector, the academia, all of them are providing a good, a lovely environment for blockchain to grow. And even domestic companies like some of those listed here, Kotak Bank, Axis Bank, ICICI, Yes Bank, and the biggest bank in India, the State Bank of India, all of them have initiated projects in this space. And a number of these are actually moving beyond just a pilot stage and getting into production as well. if we really look at, if we just go a little deeper on the adoption, I think, and this was something when we were doing this research along with NASSCOM, we found out that the Indian public sector, which is the government, is actually emerging as one of the largest consumers of blockchain here. If you see towards the right bottom, there are so many use cases, including land title registry, electronic health records, digital certificates on the education side, uh, farm insurance, cross-border remittances, microfinance. A lot of these use cases are being explored by the government, the central government, as well as a number of state governments and local governments as well. In fact, what is very interesting is that almost 50% of the states, or more than 50% of the states in India, actually have live blockchain projects ongoing at this point of time. The three top use cases that we see are around land registry. And that's, again, coming from some of the opening remarks from Dr. Singh and Mr. Subalia. Trust is very, very important. And especially when it comes to land registry, land ownership rights as they transition from generation to generation. It's a very, very interesting problem that companies are trying to solve. In fact, just a quick anecdote. There is a state in India, in Andhra Pradesh, where before our independence, or almost 100 years back, a lot of the land records are in a language, Persian, which is no longer in use, and very few people actually understand the language. So there is a big push towards taking all of those land records, which are leading to a lot of litigation and all of that, to actually moving it towards blockchain, so that going forward there is no confusion, and the retail and the real estate sector actually gets a lot of benefits from that. I also mentioned that the governments, are playing a big role in setting up the environment of the ecosystem around this. And what is happening here is that lots of center of excellences, labs, innovation hubs are being set up. For example, the government of Telangana is actually setting up what will be the country's first blockchain district. Which is, a number of incubation centers and the IT infrastructure to promote startups in the blockchain space. There are a number of conferences and events and places to get the handshakes going and get people together to discuss use cases for blockchain, which are happening across most of the governments, most of the states in India. If we really come to the production environment in India, the banking, financial services, and insurance sector is actually leading this. This data is slightly dated mid of last year, but there are over 10 production level implementations around blockchain in the BFSI sector, which, at the scale at which some of these production implementations are going, it's a great opportunity for everyone to learn about how blockchain can function and really take some inputs around that as well. So BFSI is one of the biggest one. Then healthcare, logistics, apart from government, are areas where blockchain adoption is actually is increasing quite a bit. There are some use cases. So, for example, I mentioned ICICI Bank, Bajaj Alliance. These are, again, some use cases in the BFSI space. We're also seeing the IT services companies, and I'm sure companies in Switzerland are familiar with them. Some of these are actually coming to the center of establishing these consortiums. For example, Infosys actually helped put together the consortium of banks, which is trying to identify use cases where blockchain can be implemented across the banking industry in India. Coming quickly to the startup ecosystem in India, startup scene in India is actually very, very strong. In fact, there's probably a global shift in moving towards from Silicon Valley slightly to the east when we talk about startups. And India, in the blockchain context, is really right up there. There are a few technology-specific blockchain technology-related startups, which on the top left corner, which are talking about, which are really experimenting and innovating around the key core technologies around token trading, the identity verification, IP protection, those areas. And then there is a lot of niche niche applications in different industries where startups are also working in. In fact, it's very interesting that startups have actually been executing a majority of the blockchain projects that I was talking about a little while back. These are again some use cases, order remittances, retail, healthcare, the logistics, which is the core of blockchain in terms of the most useful use case for blockchain. So we see a lot of these things emanating from the startups, and the startups are actually working on this slide is, they're really working with service providers, public sectors, the academic institutes, as well as some of the industry consortiums to really take this forward. There have been a lot of investments in the blockchain startup ecosystem as well. But I think there is a lot of opportunity there of expanding some of these investments, both from a new technology perspective as well as an application perspective. Towards the end, I know I'm very close to the time I have, but just wanted to have a quick discussion around the regulatory environment as well. So at Avasant, when we were doing this blockchain research, we looked at over 100 countries in the world and created a sort of map about how the regulatory environment and what is the different approaches. I think India right now is in that cautious stage of having a regulatory environment around blockchain. But what is very interesting is there is significant and continual traction around the evolution of policy around blockchain, and it's going beyond just the bitcoins and the cryptocurrencies, but they're actually the policies which are very focused on core enterprise use cases in blockchain as well. In fact, if I really look at the overall view, the government or the policies are quite favorable towards blockchain. They have a wait and watch approach on cryptocurrencies, but they're also extremely focused on providing a good initial launchpad for BFSI centric regulations. A couple of very recent things which are not on the slides, but which bode very well for this entire ecosystem is that there was a very recent Supreme Court of India judgment, which actually reduces some of the issues that were there with individuals trading on cryptocurrencies. And considering that a lot of blockchain work, even enterprise, will eventually move towards online digital currencies, that's a great first step. Also, the very latest draft of the policy around blockchain and distributed ledger technology is also talking about exploring the option of setting up a digital currency, just the way some other countries are doing. So all in all, in conclusion, I think the blockchain ecosystem over the last 2-3 years has really grown and evolved. There are a lot of opportunities for enterprises to actually implement blockchain or to work with Indian companies and startups to implement blockchain in their environments, and also to look at it from a very, as a strong domestic market for their blockchain related projects and activities as well. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for their time, and back to you, Dr. Singh.
Thank you for such a nice comprehensive presentation on this new buzz subject of blockchain and how India is utilizing it and the opportunity available. Thank you. I'll come back to you during the Q&A session. Before I move on to the legal and tax presentations, may I tell all the participants that you can look at the upper right side of your screen. You'll find a poll section where we have a few questions which you may like to respond to. And we also have a handout on Indian blockchain industry snapshot, which is available. So with that, let me now invite our legal and tax partner, Mr. Rushak Tadkalkar from the Rotterdam partner, to make his presentation on the subject from the legal perspective. Mr. Rushak Tadkalkar. I'll request now the presenters to be brief because we are breaching our time limits. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Singh. All the other presenters. Good evening and good afternoon to everybody. Today, we'll just run you through the legal and tax update of doing business in India. And so first thing we just want to touch base is how critical it is when a foreign entity wants to enter Indian market to explore what is the suitable entry model to India. Whether they can continue working with their project in with the foreign company itself, or do they need to come to India with a private limited company, LLP, or what kind of structure is actually suitable. So under foreign company, they can have presence as a foreign entity in India as a liaison office, branch office, project office, or as a private limited company as an incorporated entity in India. The entry models are stipulated, have different scopes for each of them. So the scope, if you are doing just licensing, will be just kind of a representation. For project office, as it say, it is dedicated to a specific project. So even if you are doing multiple projects, you will not be able to do it under one project office and will require other project offices. So depending upon the exact scope of work, what you're doing, in case you just want to act as buying, selling agent, then probably a branch office is a good option. So depending upon the scope of work, you can actually decide on what kind of entry you want to come to India. Of course, once you've established these, you can of course change it to a private limited company or not. Establishment procedures also need to be considered. As everybody is saying, India is actually one of the top for ease of doing business countries who've taken really good initiatives in last 5 years. Now the government of India has started a centralized digital process by where companies are getting incorporated at as low as 2 days or 3 days. So it's really a fast track company incorporation. Even the procedure for company incorporations have recently been really streamlined. Along with company incorporations, companies are also getting their tax registration, bank account openings. So a lot of processes which actually used to take companies to establish themselves up to 5 to 6 months are now shortened to 1 or 2 months. So which is a really good thing. Further, with the recent FDI investment changes, with the current COVID situation, the government of India has been very cautious and has made some changes wherein they have put restrictions on investments from the neighboring countries. So restrictions are not banning them, but they will have to go under prior government approval where they will be scrutinized. This simple regulation is brought in because the government is afraid of takeovers during this period, and therefore to protect the vulnerable companies, this has been introduced. As a legal position of blockchain, I think Swapnil just mentioned it before. And as such, there is no specific law which determines how blockchain technology can be used in India. You can use technology to develop apps, services, products, and Swapnil actually gave a really detailed presentation on how the government is actually thinking to use this technology. Niti Aayog, actually the policy think tank of government, has recently released its discussion paper on strategy titled Blockchain India towards enabling ease of business, ease of living, ease of governance. Under this, they've discussed various ways in which blockchain can be used. These are being tested by them, and few of them, like Swapnil just mentioned, that managing land records and transfer of ownership, supply chain, and all are also discussed. Just last point I would like to touch is the current status of cryptocurrency in India. As Swapnil also mentioned earlier, that the RBI circular, RBI had earlier restrictions on usage and trading of cryptocurrency in India. However, the Supreme Court's recent judgment has struck down that RBI circular on the grounds of proportional damages were not being shown, and therefore cryptocurrency trading is now legally allowed in India. However, we need to see how the government will actually take this, because there is another draft bill which is still pending, banning the cryptocurrency regulation and official digital currency bill. However, this bill has not been introduced, and government is under serious considering whether they need to really ban this or they need to regulate it. So with that, I will give this to my colleague Chetan, who will take you through tax updates.
So I know like there is a time constraint, so I'll quickly take you through some of the tax framework in India and what could be relevant in a context of blockchain. So typically, the Indian tax law is divided into domestic tax law and double tax avoidance agreements. So in case there is any transaction that is happening between India and a foreign company, then foreign company will be subject to taxation as per the Indian domestic law or the double tax avoidance agreement between India and the respective countries. So in this case, it will be between India and Switzerland. So whatever is more beneficial, that will be applicable. Apart from this, there are transversing provisions which really deal with the type of pricing mechanism between the group companies that is there. And there is also globally the country by country report regulations have been introduced. So those regulations are also applicable in India, but that is the threshold is quite high. The companies having global consolidated turnover exceeding euro 750 million, this kind of provisions would apply. Then recently, India also has introduced Equalization Levy, which is more to deal with online sale of goods, online provision of services. So that we should be mindful of. In case there are any online provision of services happening by a company based in Switzerland to Indian counterparts, then we need to see whether equalization levy could come into picture. It has been introduced at 2% currently on such transactions. Apart from this, on indirect taxes, there are customs regulations for import of goods and services, foreign trade policies there to grant some export benefits like export of goods or export of services. And there is a GST, goods and services tax, which is more sort of levy on any kind of goods or services sold in India. So this is a broad framework from tax perspective. Moving on to the next slide, so I'll cover some important touch points like what are the rates, etc. in India. So in India, while so far it has always been that the corporate tax rates were always upwards of 30%. So the base rate was 30%, and then including surcharge cess, it generally used to travel between 33 to 35%. Now, last year, there was a kind of significant move to reduce these rates, and the general corporate tax rate has now brought down to 22%. So that is an option available to the companies to choose this tax rate by giving up certain deductions, exemptions, which may be otherwise available to them. So again, those deductions, exemptions may not be so significant for the blockchain sector that we are looking at, but that can be really looked at when a particular decision is taken to set up a shop in India. So even for manufacturing, even the rate is even below 22%, it is 15%, and these rates, of course, you have to increase by surcharge and cess. The rates respectively become 25% and 17% in such case. Apart from this, one of the key concerns is, okay, when we set up a subsidiary in India, we make profits, and we have to send it back. Then what happens? So far in India, there was dividend distribution tax, so which was 20%. And the credit did not used to be available for that. Now it has been changed, and there is a withholding provision that has been introduced. Digital tax, we have discussed that it is equalization levy. Then for any foreign currency loan, so instead of equity, if there is a loan funding, then there is a very low tax rate of 5% that is applicable on interest. And of course, there are certain limitations in intra-group financing, thin capitalization provisions that we call, where it is restricted to 30% of profits, the deduction of intercompany interest. Apart from that, there are general provision, general anti-avoidance rule. There are certain sector-specific incentives. There are incentives for startup companies. So if like blockchain is more innovative, so if there are any innovative or improvised techniques or processes are available and that are being offered, then even the registration under startup can be looked at, which is for which there is an incentive of 100% deduction for 3 years out of 10 years from incorporation. So that is a very important provision. And then I think that's it. Other than that, there are certain global OECD projects which have also been kind of implemented in India in terms of multilateral instrument, which kind of is changing now certain tax treaty provisions. So this is a broad framework which is, I think, more in line with international kind of international practices. And I believe like with reduced corporate tax rates, it offers really a very good opportunity to companies to invest in India. Yeah, with that, I end my presentation. Thank you.
And to the point of the presentation. With that, we move to the last section of this webinar, which is the question and answer session. I'll ask questions in the order of sequence on which the presenters appeared on the screen. The first question which I have received is for Mr. Tarun Gupta, and it inquires that what measures is India taking to become front runner for global supply chain post COVID-19? It refers to your representation, on infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as I mentioned briefly as well, there is a move amongst many companies to reduce their reliance on any particular country for the supply chain, and there we have taken steps specifically with regards to reduction. I would focus on two: reduction in tax rates, and second, we are moving towards plug and play kind of facilities in various states in our industrial parks, be it food parks, be it electronics cluster, where the companies along with their vendors can come and set up fairly quickly. Today there's an announcement as well that similarly is doing for electronics, where some states will be offering 1,000 acres for large companies to come along with their vendors.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gupta. I have a few more questions, but we are out of time, so I'll move on to
Sure.
the guest of honor today, Mr. Vincent Subilia. Mr. Subilia, there's a question for you. How Switzerland can help Swiss startups working on blockchain to have enough financial resources to extend their product to India? Would you like to respond to that?
Well, thank you very much indeed. Of course, financing is the key factor, and in light of the crisis which we're being confronted with, there's been a clear signal given by both the federal and the regional authorities here in Switzerland to support startups, because the startups of today are the SMEs of tomorrow. So I guess while financing is always a key challenge for startups, I believe that with a robust project, there will be enough financing to help them grow not only domestically, but also look at India with, of course, the 4Ds that you've mentioned, including the demographics, because India is a significant domestic market for Swiss companies. So I guess where there's a good idea, there'll be a good project, and there will be some sound financing. So I'm not too concerned on that front, provided, of course, we can grow even more resilient and agile from this crisis, which of course has very severely impacted the finances of many of our corporate actors here in Switzerland and all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Subelia. I move on to the next presenter, guest speaker from NASSCOM, Mr. Swapnil Bhatnagar. The question is that, is there, I'm just redrafting the question. It says that, is there a comprehensive GUI strategy on blockchain? I think what we saw was state-specific sort of projects that you mentioned in your presentation, but is there a comprehensive GUI Government of India strategy?
Yeah. So I think the presenters after me also, Rushak, also referred to this. The Niti Aayog is heavily involved in drafting out, I think, in India strategy around blockchain and distributed ledgers. I believe the current version is a draft version, which is out for comments and all of that. But I think it's coming soon, a comprehensive strategy around all of that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Swapnil. Now that takes me to the last question for today, and I'll pose it to Rushak. It's from the legal side. Is it possible to open a bank account in India for a blockchain company using cryptocurrencies? If yes, is wallet hosting by banks also compliant?
Yes, the answer would be yes. After the Supreme Court judgment, now dealing in cryptocurrency in India is legally allowed. Even in the Supreme Court judgment, they've said that cryptocurrency is capable of being accepted as a valid payment system in India. However, RBI would be have regulations to come out with regulations for that. And as such, I think practically we will have to check with the bankers if they are now starting to open bank accounts using cryptocurrency. So I see a practical challenge here more than a legal one.
Okay, thank you. With that, we come to the close of this webinar. I would like to mention that all the presentations we made today would be available on the MISSP website. We'll also be converting this webinar into a video and podcast, and will be releasing on our YouTube channel and uploading on our website. I would like to thank Mr. Subilia for joining us as the guest of honor, Mr. Swapnil Bhatnagar for joining us as a guest speaker from India, and to all the presenters today. I hope that with this presentation, with this webinar, we have been able to reinforce and reiterate the idea and the possibilities of a strong collaboration between Indian and Swiss business ecosystems, including in these new cutting-edge areas like blockchain. Thank you. Have a good day ahead.